We're going to be coming to you today out of two places in the Bible, the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 21, and the book of Revelation, chapter 8 and 9. So we're going to cover a lot today, and I encourage you to pump this out, and don't just take my word for what you're about to hear, but go ahead and study on your own and verify that what I'm telling you is true. You're going to hear some things that you've been hearing, but you're also going to hear some things I think that will cause you to take a bit of a pause and go, whoa, that's pretty intense. So let's get into this, all right? Beginning in the Gospel of St. Luke, I'm going to read three verses here. Chapter 21, the Lord Jesus Christ is talking specifically about the final time. It's going to set the tone for what we're going to look at today, and we want you to be able to follow along. Luke 21, verse 25. Jesus is speaking, and he says, "And there shall be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars. Upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them, for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken." All right, let's say amen to that. Now look, we're going to get into this today, but we're going to specifically hone in on the signs that the Lord told us to look at. Signs in the sun, signs in the moon, signs in the stars. As we go along in the study, you'll see the interesting thing that the word that is used in the Greek for stars is the Greek word ASTER. It is where we get our word asteroid, and that is going to make a little bit more sense as we go along. So I want to talk to you, we're going to go systematically through this. We're going to be specifically talking about a predicted asteroid that is headed our way. Much of the information is out there, but there's a lot of things you're going to hear that you maybe haven't considered before. Now listen, as we get into this, I want to take a systematic approach to this so that we can begin to really take a serious look at where we are and what it is that we're looking at. So we're going to begin in the 20th century. Jesus told us to begin to pay attention to the signs, and that there would be various signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and that there would come a time when men's hearts would begin to fail them. In verse 26, he says here, "For fear and for looking after those things which what? Are coming on the earth." So I believe he's referencing not only the terrestrial events upon the planet itself, fire, flood, famine, earthquakes, but he uses a very unique phrasing there, things that are coming on the earth. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. So let's just go through this really quick here. There were many events that occurred in the 20th century, many signs, I believe, or maybe to some they're just simply random events. But I'm going to leave that for you to decide. We're going to look at both events in the 20th century and now in the first couple decades heading into the conclusion of the third decade of the 21st century. We're only going to look at a few, but it's going to set the table for what we're going to get into. I want to begin with, as the 20th century began, something very interesting happened. In 1906, as the 20th century began, there was something that some of you are familiar with that took place. And why this is interesting to me is because it kind of set the tone for what would follow in the 20th century. In 1906, on April the 9th, something known as the Azusa Street Revival took place. And what that was, for those of you who don't know, it was a historic series of revival meetings that took place in LA, California. It was led by a pastor by the name of William J. Seymour, an African-American preacher. The revival began on April the 9th, 1906, and it continued roughly for about 9 years or so, up until 1915. What's interesting to me is that the date that they give for the beginning of the revival, April the 9th, 1906, I find incredibly fascinating because only 9 days later, I believe it was, something else took place. You had the outpouring of what many call the latter rain of the Holy Spirit, and they particularly target that particular revival on Azusa Street. But 9 days later, I believe it was, 9 days later, it was April the 18th, 1906, it was followed by an incredible earthquake in San Francisco. This is a picture of the destruction of San Francisco in 1906. It occurred 9 days after the established date of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit on Azusa Street. Isn't it ironic that would happen? I think the two are not only interesting to connect, but at the same time, we can ask the question, are they just simply random events? Or is this something that was a portend of what was coming and what we had, in essence, entered into as the 20th century approached and began to unfold in the early 1906s? There's so many events we could look at, but I'm just going to highlight a few. This is one of them. Another interesting thing in my as I began to study these things was that, ironically, for those of you that are into numbers out there, this time frame, April 9th, 1906, in the Hebrew calendar is the year 5666. I'm just telling you, man, you can't make this stuff up, right? So is it possible that we have the outpouring of the Spirit, 1906, April the 9th, 9 days later, April the 18th, a destruction of San Francisco. We ain't got to get into San Francisco, but just leave it out there. But it also happened to be the Hebrew calendar year 5666. I believe this is important because we are headed and are well underway now, which we'll get into in a little bit later, the approaching of who I call the son of Lucifer, the Antichrist. He is about to make his appearance in the not too distant future, and the world that we're living in right now is a perfect, is in such chaos and confusion right now that I think that we're seeing these things. Now, listen, so that's just ironic, but I want to fast forward because there were many events that took place in the 20th century, but also into the 21st century that I want to particularly hone in on the events that we call the blood moons. Remember, we're talking about signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. There were several blood moons that took place across the 20th century and then into 2014 and 2015 of our time right now. Now, to understand why this is significant is this. Listen, the rabbinic scholars tell us two things about solar eclipses and about blood moons. They tell us that a solar eclipse, pay attention to this, they consider to be a bad omen for the entire world. But, and the reason they say it pertains to the nations of the world is because it runs on the solar calendar, right? But as far as a blood moon or a lunar eclipse, the rabbinic scholars consider it a bad sign for the Jewish nation. One of the reasons that is because they calculate their months based on the moon and not on the sun. So whenever they see a blood moon and it falls on significant dates, they consider that to be an omen for the Jewish nation. Now, when you coincide a blood moon and a solar eclipse in the same time frame, it's talking about an omen that is possibly foretelling what is just ahead for the nations of the world. Now, let me just talk a little bit about the blood moons. The teaching on the 4 blood moons has recently captivated attention, especially in the middle part of 2014 and 15. The teaching states that when there's 4 consecutive blood moons and they particularly fall on a Jewish feast day, there are major events which shall affect the Jewish people that will follow in close proximity after the appearance of the blood moon. This phenomenon of 4 consecutive blood moons coinciding with Jewish feast days, listen to this, has only occurred 10 times since the year 1 AD. So in the last 2,000 years, this particular conjunction of what they call a tetrad, or the appearance of blood moons on feast days, has only happened 10 times over the last 2,000 years. And only 3 times since 1492 AD this has happened. And there were 3 things that happened in conjunction with this up until we reached 2014 and 2015. There was, in 1492, there was the Spanish Inquisition. And what followed the Spanish Inquisition was a tetrad, what they call a tetrad, the appearance of 4 consecutive blood moons over 1493 and 1494, all occurring on high Jewish feast days. Then the next time we see an appearance of it is almost 500 years later, and that occurred on 1948, May the 14th. Israel, coming out of World War II, was reborn as a nation. Why is that important? Let me show you something here. I have this book. Someone wrote me a while back asking me about where I was talking about some of the early scholars in the early 20th century that knew that these things were signs of what the prophets said would happen. So when they saw these outpourings of the Spirit, they saw Israel and World War I, Israel being brought back, or given the right to be brought back into their homeland after 2,000 years due to the Balfour Declaration. You can go study all that yourself. But the early scholars of the 20th century, this one in particular, H.C. Morrison, this book was written in, 1917. So in here, they began to postulate and speculate. The name of this book is The World in Prophecy, The Downfall of the Kaiser and the End of a Dispensation. So what he puts forth in this book were the historic events that they began to see early on in the 20th century. To them was like this beacon flashing in the night, telling them that the prophetic time clock had begun to tick again. And so these blood moons which I've chosen to focus on, there's many other events that took place. You can go down the rabbit hole on that yourself. But I mean, it's quite amazing that we began to see blood moons immediately appear after the outpouring of the Spirit, the Great San Francisco earthquake, man takes flight, right? Wilbur and Orville Wright, I believe it was 1906, 1908, I can't remember. But in that first decade, we actually flew a plane 150 feet. At Kitty Hawk, Wilbur and Orville Wright. So a lot of things. The Industrial Revolution began to take place. The Balfour Declaration giving the Jews the right to return to Jerusalem, to Israel, and establish a homeland, which then triggered World War II. Right, and all these events that began to happen, the rise of a foreshadow of the Antichrist would follow Adolf Hitler into World War II, and then the ovens of Auschwitz and Treblinka and Buchenwald and all those horrific places that we know of from history. All of that came after 1906 into the early teens, followed, if you remember as well, there was a huge economic collapse that took place in 1929, October of 1929. We then went into World War, the rise of Hitler, and then the entire world was at war. Out of that world war, as we've talked about many times, those of you who have listened to us before, there came a regathering of the Jewish people. For the first time in 2,000 years, the words of the prophets were coming to pass, the words of Moses and the words of the prophets that said in the last days that it would no longer be said, blessed be the Lord God who brought up the children of Israel out of Egypt, but it would then be said, blessed be the Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who brought up the children of Israel from the 4 corners of the world where they had been scattered. What's interesting, as we look in the early part of the 20th century, going into the mid part of the 20th century in 1948, that came to pass as the United Nations in Resolution 248 on May the 12th, I believe, May the 14th, voted that Israel had a right to return to her own homeland. And on noon of that day, President David Ben-Gurion, the Zionist, proclaimed Israel as an established state in the nations of the world. Immediately following that, in the year 1949 and 1950, on the Jewish high holy days, there were a subsequent 4 successive blood moons. 1949, Passover and Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. 1950, Passover and Sukkot again. The odds of this happening are astronomical, to say the least, no pun intended, right? So then we go on into 1967, 1968. Another succession of blood moons took place on those high feast days. Passover 1967, Sukkot 1967, Passover 1968, Sukkot 1968. Another series of 4 blood moons. What happened in that time frame? After really almost 3,000 years, if you want to, depending on how you reckon it, since David bought Jerusalem from Araunah the Jebusite. For those of you who know your Bible history, Jerusalem came back into the hands of the Jewish people as Moshe Dayan and his forces came into the holy city, and Shlomo ben Gorion, I think was his name, blew the ram shofar trumpet as the soldiers who were hardened through Middle East conflict in the Israeli IDF forces began to weep, as for the first time in thousands of years they recaptured and laid claim to the holy city. Moshe Dayan, in a political move, would give the Temple Mount back into the control of the king of Jordan, King Hussein. And since then, Jerusalem has been a troubled spot, right? However, what we're talking about here is in that same historical time frame, the blood moons appeared in succession. Now listen, as we just read, it's ironic, right? Because when they were regathered, those blood moons appeared. And what we said the rabbis have taught us is that an eclipse or a blood moon is considered a bad sign for the Jewish nation. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because it is a bad sign. Although many people were rejoicing, even in the evangelical community, you need to rotate your understanding when it comes to what biblical prophecy actually says. These things, while they are fulfillment of prophetic scriptures, they are not good signs. They represent something malevolent is coming, something bad is coming. And what we know from the prophets is that Israel itself is going to be surrounded. That's what everything we see happening right now, taking place across the face of the earth, is all about. This chaos is going to lead to the Middle East. It's going to lead to Israel, for this is what the prophets have said. Now listen, these major events all affected the Jewish people, and they have occurred in close proximity. All these tetrads that we were talking about. Interesting thing about these tetrads, or these blood moons as well, on these dates, these conjunctions we're talking about, remember what Jesus said, signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. There were 4 rare blood moons on Passover and Sukkot that occurred throughout the years, 2 years in a row throughout history. One was at the time that Israel entered Egypt. So when Joseph was sent ahead, right, sold into slavery, all those years later, you go study your Bibles, you see that a famine hit the land, and Jacob came down with his 70 sons and grandsons and grandchildren, 12 sons, and the total family size was about 70. They came down into Egypt, and from there they would become slaves to a foreshadow of the Antichrist, Pharaoh himself. Moses, the deliverer who God would send, and Aaron would lead them out 400 and something years later. But those blood moons when Israel entered Egypt occurred then. Also, the blood moons occurred the year that Jacob, the patriarch, died, as he was prophesying over his sons. You can read about his prophecies over his sons in Genesis 49. Very interesting. Also, when David became king over Israel, when he was actually brought in, anointed king at Hebron, and then 7 years later received and anointed as king over all Israel, there were a series of 2 years in a row of blood moons. And then, as we already talked about, the rebirth of Israel. Now, I'm fast forwarding into 2014, but we saw the same thing take place in 2014 on April the 15th, 2024 Passover, October the 8th, 2014 Tabernacles. In between the two, there was a total solar eclipse of the sun on March the 20th, 2015. And as we talked about just a moment ago, what the rabbinic scholars tell us is that when the two coincide, it is a revelation that trouble is coming. It's a bad omen for the entire world, the nations of the world, as well as Israel itself. So what's fascinating is in 2014, Passover, April 15, 2014, October 8th, Sukkot, 2014. In between that, after that came a solar eclipse on March the 20th, 2015. And then followed by a Passover blood moon again, April the 4th, 2015, and September the 28th, 2015. So if we are following this logic, right, what was being told in the heavens as Jesus directed us to look at was that something's coming, something's just ahead, 2014, 2015. It was being declared in the heavens. Now listen, something really interesting I came across as I was studying the blood moon. Something happened. Check this out. Pay attention. If you haven't been listening to me, pay attention to this. Something happened on July the 27th, 2018. And I got this from Reuters. Listen to this. This is written by Guy Falconbridge. He wrote this article for Reuters, London, Reuters. July 27th, 2018, a blood moon, this was 2018, he said, a blood moon, and it did happen, a blood moon will appear in the night sky around much of the world Friday night. This was written in 2018. As the moon moves into the shadow of the earth, listen, it will be the longest lunar eclipse of the 21st century. The total eclipse lasted an hour and 42 minutes and 57 seconds. Though a partial eclipse precedes and follows the total eclipse, meaning that the moon will spend a total of 3 hours and 54 minutes in the Earth's umbral shadow, according to NASA. The eclipse will be visible from Europe, Africa, and the Middle East between, check this out, sunset and midnight. Interesting. Reminds me of Matthew 25, right? At midnight, a cry was made. And then between midnight and sunrise in Asia and Australia. Now, as I was reading that article in my preparation for this live, that date sounded familiar to me, so I went and looked back in the Hebrew calendar, and lo and behold, that date of that blood moon on July the 28th, 2018 happened to be on the 15th of Av in the Hebrew calendar. Well, what is the 15th of Av in the Hebrew calendar? It is what they call, let me see if I can find that here. I had it here. Where'd you go? Well, anyway, it is the time. It's an interesting time because, oh, there it is. Yeah, that's it. I just want to get this right. Okay, so July the 27th, 2018, the longest blood moon of the 21st century took place. And it sounded familiar to me, so I went and looked, and sure enough, it was the 15th of Av. What is the 15th of Av? It is the time when the Jewish nation, the rabbis tell us, celebrate the daughters of Jerusalem. Many years ago, they would go into the vineyards. Are you listening? For those of you who understand symbolism, on the 15th of Av. And whoever did not have a wife would go to the vineyard and would find himself a bride. As the full moon of the month of Av, it is the festival, listen, of a future redemption. And it marks the end of a tragedy, which occurs every year. They celebrate, or they don't, they mourn what they call the 9th of Av, which is the time that the Babylonians destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, as well as the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. So I found it incredibly interesting that on July the 27th, 2018, the longest blood moon of the 21st century occurred, and it just happened to fall on the 15th of Av, which celebrates the gathering of a bride as she dances in the vineyard. Is it possible that though the blood moon portends a bad omen, At the same time, it drew our attention to the festival as if the heavens themselves were saying, it's not going to be very long now that the man will come for his bride, come looking for his bride. Now listen, this also, and I'm hurrying, listen, this also is going to blow you away. So, in my studies, I came across this. The first ever, you can't make this up, the first ever election day blood moon lunar eclipse is coming. When? November the 8th. Just a couple weeks from now. It's on November the 8th, 2022. On early election day morning, look, you can't make this up, okay, look. On early election day morning, early risers will have the opportunity to observe a November blood moon undergo a total blood moon eclipse. This will be the second lunar eclipse this year. The last one took place on May the 16th, 2022. So I said, okay, this is just like, no way, right? So I said, okay, well, okay, seriously? Well, did anything happen on May the 16th? Well, I couldn't believe it. I go look, and sure enough, that just happens to be the same day. I know you're just, in the year 1313 BC, it symbolizes the day, or not symbolizes, but it is the exact day. It's the 15th day of the year Iyar in the Hebrew calendar, where they observe that it was on that day that the supply of matzah, the supply of unleavened bread, which the Jewish people brought out of Egypt, had run out. And that's when the people began to complain to Moses that they had no bread. But then the promise came from Moses that God was going to send bread from heaven. Oh my God, those of you who have spiritual ears, I don't know. I'm just pointing out to you something interesting. So, on November the 8th, we've got a blood moon getting ready to take place. And check this out. You might want to, if you missed this one, you might want to try and catch the one that's coming on March the 14th, 2025, because that's the next blood moon. But March the 14th, 2025, I said, okay, since we're already losing our mind and just finding all this stuff out, right? Could it be that March the 14th, 2025 and the blood moon coincide with some sort of an important date in the Hebrew calendar? Sure enough, it does. On that day, you can't make this up, the Hebrews are going to celebrate Purim. Well, what is Purim? For those of you who don't know, who are new to the Bible, it's the celebration of Esther and the destruction of Haman. Haman is a foreshadow of the son of Lucifer, the son of perdition, the wicked one who is coming, who will ultimately come and plant his tabernacle in Jerusalem and will attempt to destroy the Jewish people. A blood moon on March the 14th, 2025, on the very day that Purim is celebrated, is it possibly signifying to the Jewish nation that wicked one is coming and you need to prepare? All right, let's hurry. Okay, there were other events, right? Let's keep going. How much time I got, Emily? Okay, I got time. Listen. 29. All right, listen. Other events. 1996, 1997, there was the Hale-Bopp comet, right? July, I believe it appeared in July. But from 1996 to 1997, and it was visible in the sky for how many months? 18 months. Well, why is that important? Well, I don't know. I'm just, since we're totally off the deep end, right? 18 months, that's 3 times 6, I think. Kind of weird, kind of freaky. Also, this comet, this Hale-Bopp comet in 96, 97, which was in the sky for 18 months, the rabbis tell us that the last time it appeared was in the days of Noah. Let me just read this to you. Comet Hale-Bopp is a comet that was one of the most widely observed of the 20th century, one of the brightest seen for many decades, and this is it. You know, this is that comet, quite extraordinary. Some of you weren't even alive in 1996, but here it is. I mean, that was flying through the skies, and everybody saw it for almost 18 months. Now listen, there's many other events that occurred throughout the 20th century, like Y2K. For those of you who know your history or are old like me, Y2K, I believe Y2K was a great global experiment. I think that the powers that be, the elites, the Luciferians, whatever you want to call them, who have been bringing about this global change, bringing about this transition from the old world to the new, longing to set on their throne that one that's coming. I think Y2K was a grand global experiment. Well, for those of you who are too young to remember what that is, there was this rumor that that computer programmers and the inventors of computer programming had not factored in that when we would reach the year 2000, that the actual digital clock on the computers would turn to flat out zeros. And so the computer would not recognize, or the computer systems of the world wouldn't recognize zeros. And there was all kinds of wild speculation, right? It's going to launch nuclear weapons. The entire world is going to collapse because it's totally interconnected. And so it set about a frenzy of people, buying food and, digging bunkers. And there were all kinds of people selling books. And even the United States government and the governments of the world distributed billions of dollars to study this possible horrible scenario that was going to take place. So if you were alive then, you had Hale-Bopp flying through the heavens, right? And then you have all these people saying the end of the world is going to take place in the year 2000 because the computer systems are going to crash. It'll be mass mayhem, right? Everybody was freaking out. But I think they kind of like threw that Y2K thing in there because it was really like a mass psychosis. It was a mass experiment to see how the human population would respond to a crisis situation of a global nature. I think it was already laying the groundwork for what we would see in 2020 and the release of this virus, this pandemic that we've all that triggered a whole new paradigm shift in our life, right? So Y2K. Well, the year 2000 rolled around, nothing happened. But then as we went into the 21st century, all of us, we're just going to go quickly now. In the year 2001, 9/11 occurred, right? I think that's when the great global reset actually began. Laws were changed, nations changed, everything. The whole system began to be changed. Technology hadn't totally caught up yet, but it was well underway. And then we had here in the United States the initiation of the Patriot Act, the removing of all kinds of personal freedoms under the guise of protecting us, right? They began to educate the masses to allow the government to implement a wide and varying, sweeping cutting away of personal freedoms all across the democratic West, right? So 9/11, 2004, here we go, was the year that the asteroid Apophis was discovered. But we're going to talk about that later as we get into and finish this off today. But 2004, Apophis was first discovered. 2004, December 26th, there was a 9.1, 9.3 earthquake in the Indian Ocean. For those of you who remember, it resulted in a tsunami that had over 100 feet high waves, and 230,000 people were wiped off the planet by 100-foot high waves in December of 2004. As we got into March, I'm just hitting highlights now. March 2011, we had the Japanese earthquake. Why are you going through all this? Because I want you to see all of this has been happening. And to most people, it seems like random events, like disconnected events. But those who can see, you begin to see something is being said. It's not only in the sun, the moon, and the stars, but upon the earth, distress of nations, exactly as Jesus Christ said it would be. March 2011, Japan, 9.1 earthquake. Check this out. The earthquake lasted 6 minutes. I'm kidding. All right, 6 minutes. Okay, you can't make that up, right? So the earthquake lasts 6 minutes, and then there was a tsunami. Check this out. That had 133-foot high waves that moved across Japan, parts of Japan, traveling at 435 miles an hour. 20,000 people died, 2,600 are missing, and it was followed by a nuclear disaster at the Fukushima power plant, which has released radiation across the planet. Then in 2017 and 2024, what did we have but the great solar eclipse of August 20, 1, 2017, and there's another solar eclipse. You remember what the rabbinic scholars tell us? Solar eclipses have to do, especially total solar eclipses, have to do with portends and omens that danger is coming to the nations of the world. Well, this particular solar eclipse in 2017, I went with my family to witness it in Idaho. Quite spectacular. But it's coming again, April the 8th, 2024. 7 years, interestingly, right? In the next couple of years, we're going to see the eclipse. But check this out. Notice when it's complete, it makes a complete X across the United States of America. Is this a sign that she's coming under judgment very, very soon? Now let's hurry. Okay, let's go. I hope I'm not boring you out there. Now listen. As 2020 closed out, we've talked about this before. Jupiter, the king planet, Saturn, which represents Kronos or Lucifer, conjoined for a spectacular conjunction in the house, rose into the house of Capricorn, which is the house of the goat. Was this a heavenly announcement which occurred on the winter solstice, that the son of Lucifer, the son of perdition, is soon to come to the earth? Remember, the wise men followed a spectacular heavenly display at the birth of Christ. Why should it be some sort of a strange thought that it would occur also to announce the coming of the son of Lucifer? Now listen, let me show you. This was that great conjunction. I hope you can see this. These two planets. And then notice here, as Jupiter and Saturn rose into Capricorn, ultimately coming into Aquarius. Now you'd say, why is that important? We don't believe in that kind of stuff. Well, go read the book of Job, man. Go read the book of Job, because God directs Job's attention to the Pleiades, to Arcturus, to Orion, and then he talks about the Mazarot. Those are the 12 major houses in the sky, the constellations in the sky. Go do your homework before you get mad at me and start, spitting at me and all that kind of stuff. Now listen, all of this was followed in 2021 as it closed out. We went into 2020 and then into 2021. Check it out. We're going quickly now. It was followed by a transition of power in the United States. Then we had the January 6th incident. Washington, D.C. put itself in a cage. Do you remember that? I believe that America carries that spirit of Babylon, and that cage was a fulfillment of Revelation chapter 18, verse 2. Babylon is fallen. She's become a habitation of devils, a cage or a hold of every morally lewd in thought and life spirit. That's literally what it means. From that point, America began to export its redefined moral agenda at home and abroad across the nations of the world. 2021 gave way to 2022. Wars and rumors of wars. Russia, Ukraine, China, NATO, talk of nuclear war. And the continuing emergence of deadly viruses for which new vaccines are emerging without any scientific trials. They're just approving them, right? And they're being approved under the Emergency Use Authorization Act and the World Health Organization. As we close out 2022 into 2023, a dark and a cold winter is lying ahead for many in Europe and America. There's economic collapse, and it's a reality for many, and it's going to increase. Inflation and stagflation are soaring. The energy crisis that is looming is catastrophic, and 2023, they say, could witness global food shortages, not only in the third world countries, but totally across the West as well. And as we go forward in the next several years, we're going to witness even more celestial events. There'll be that 2024 total eclipse we already talked about. It'll also be followed by another total solar eclipse in 2027. 2027's eclipse will be the second longest in human history. And check this out. It's going to last 6 minutes. All right. Then can't make it up, man. Then comes 2029, 2 years later. That's a little over 6 years from now. Apophis. Before we discuss Apophis, I want to read Revelation chapter 8 to you. Revelation chapter 8, and then we'll get into this really quick. I only have a few minutes left. I'll try to get it all in. Now listen, Revelation chapter 8 is the account of the coming forward of the 7 angels. Remember this, the 7 angels with the 7 trumpets. They begin to blow those trumpets in succession. And let's begin reading. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. They were cast upon the earth, and a third part of the trees is burned up. All the grass is burned up. The second angel sounded, and listen to this, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And a third part of the sea became blood. And a third part of the creatures which were in the sea that had life died, and a third part of the ships were destroyed. I believe what John is actually describing is this great asteroid that's coming. Notice when an asteroid comes into the gravitational force and begins to come down into the earth, I think what we're seeing here in verse 7 is it's beginning to break apart. That's why you first see hail coming down, right? You see pieces of it coming down onto the earth, but then it's followed by a bigger chunk, right? That's what it talks about here when it says that in verse 8 that there's a great mountain coming down. I think we're seeing like a chunk of this great asteroid that's coming. And then verse 9, a third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life will die, and a third part of the ships. How would the ships be destroyed from a great mountain falling into the sea? Well, we just read about the earthquakes that occurred in December 26, 2004, and in March of 2011. They caused tsunamis. One in Japan, the tsunami wave was 133 feet high, moving at 435 miles an hour. If this great mountain is indeed just part of an asteroid that's coming and it hits the sea, imagine the size of the subsequent tsunami that'll take place. It could account for why the ships will be destroyed. And a third angel sounded, and there falls, listen, a great ASTER, or asteroid, where we get our word asteroid, for in the Greek it's ASTER, from heaven, burning as a lamp. It falls onto a third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of water. And the name of the star is called wormwood. And a third part of the waters become wormwood. Many die because of the waters. Now listen, I think what we are seeing here is a description, quite possibly, of this great asteroid that's headed our way by the name of Apophis. Remember, Apophis was discovered officially in June of 2004 by astronomers at the Peak National Observatory, and later confirmed in 2004 by astronomers at the Sighting Spring Survey in Australia. Now listen, much of the information about Apophis is already out there. Just go do your own homework. But I think today, as we have just about 10 minutes left, I think today I'm going to share to you, because frankly, I'm just tired of holding back on you guys. So you're either going to like go, whoa, this is pretty cool, or you're going to say, this guy's off his rocker, right? But listen, I'm going to share with you what I see. Now listen, you're going to hear more and more as we near this coming of Apophis and its rendezvous with our planet. You're going to hear more about it. Now remember, Apophis, it's an interesting that they called it that. It's a myth, so they say, and we'll get into that in a second. But in the Chaldean numerology, the meaning of Apophis, or the numerical value of Apophis, get this, it's 6. And the Pythagorean numerology of Apophis is 3. Okay, I won't go there. 3 and 6. Okay, we're just kidding. Just ironic. I'm just telling you, it's ironic. So NASA tells us it will be here, pay attention, interestingly, April the 13th, which just happens to be Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th, 2029. Well, what else is interesting about this? April the 13th, 2029 just happens to be Passover. Is there a connection? Maybe. Apophis means chaos, destruction, destroyer. Isn't it interesting that Passover celebrates God protecting his people as the destroyer comes to Egypt? Apophis is scheduled to either pass by earth or hit the earth at the very same time that we celebrate the release of God's people from Egypt. Apophis is Egyptian. Now, Dr. Thomas Horn, let's hurry here. Dr. Thomas Horn, in his book, The Wormwood Prophecy, he says something very interesting. He says that concerning Apophis, that the investigation is actually happening behind the scenes right now. involving a cover-up, quite possibly, of the highest order by the national space agencies, including NASA. The bottom line is that these space agency scientists, they don't want you to know any sooner than will become necessary the true odds that this asteroid Apophis, the destroyer, is going to strike the Earth. At the time he wrote his book, it was 9 years, but now it's only 6 years from now, bringing with it catastrophic, possibly biblical consequences. Now let me read this to you. In a recent peer-reviewed paper, an empirical examination of NEOWISE, what they call NEOWISE, or the Near Earth Object Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer Asteroid Analysis and Results, physicist Nathan Myhrvold, former technology officer at Microsoft and a true polymath and working scientist who has published original research in the paleobiology, climatology, and astronomy fields. He holds over 800 U.S. patents. In other words, he's not some kind of weirdo, right? He's also known as Bill Gates' second brain. He points out he is almost always on the almost always on the A list of the world's top 100 greatest thinkers. He is refuting asteroid data from NASA as suffering from systemic errors and inconsistencies regarding the potential near Earth approach of Apophis. Just short of being a whistleblower, Myhrvold goes on to charge, listen, that NASA is deliberately misreporting the number of threats by near-Earth objects being tracked by their NEOWISE project, accusing scientists at the Space Agency of behaving extremely deceptively. Deliberate scientific misconduct and a cover-up of very real and potentially imminent space threats. The very NASA managers who should have been supervising the project were more interested in protecting it from scrutiny, he said. The issues that he's calling misconduct in the NEOWISE papers were not inadvertent. They appear to have been deliberate choices made repeatedly by the team over a long period of time, and these actions have caused the astronomical community to work under the false belief that NEOWISE results are more accurate and have smaller errors than the evidence warrants. In other words, Myhrvold's findings suggest the largest database in the world, more than all other sources combined of information detailing diameter, albedo, and other properties, approximately 164,000 asteroids, is suffering, listen to this, from intentionally manipulated information. At worst, an inadequate analysis at best, with the net result being that the public is being kept in the dark regarding Apophis. Recent concerns voiced by other experts agree with me, Myhrvold said, and one argument even stems from variations, listen to this, in the formula of pi, which could mean a difference in the calculated trajectory of the soaring masses in space. If an asteroid or meteor in question is described with the phrases such as skimming past the Earth when its orbit near Earth is referenced, even the tiniest small errors in calculation could equal big consequences for our planet. This brings me to the curious case of a man named Harry Lear. Who is Harry Lear, you might say? Well, if you do a research on him, you'll find out some call him a kook, some call him, a prophet. Some say he's just lost his mind. But he is a highly respected mathematician. Now listen to what the curious case of Harry Lear, what he says. For one example, mathematician Harry Lear recently asserted the claim that the math formula that NASA is using to calculate the trajectory of Apophis by the NASA scientists is off. According to Harry Lear, this miscalculation leaves the space agency's numbers off by 900,000 kilometers for Earth and 800,000 kilometers for Apophis. Mr. Lear implies this could send Apophis crashing into the Earth in less than 10 years at the time of the writing of this article from now, which is actually April the 13th, 2029, actually 6 years from now. Now listen to this. You can go look it up on the net. It's hard to find, but you can find it. Mr. Lear sent an open letter to President Trump in 2018 to the United States government and a whole list of some very, very smart people from Cambridge and MIT and Harvard. Go look it up. The curious case of Mr. Lear. He sent an open letter to Trump, to the U.S. government, begging them to cross-check his mathematics immediately, even though he ends his open letter with the ominous admonition that we may already be out of time. Now, as crazy as the wide and varying opinions are about Mr. Harry Lear, the truth of the matter is that no one from Harvard, MIT, Oxford, go down the list, from the highest government agencies across the West, no one in the scientific or mathematic community has refuted his open letter and his math on the trajectory of Apophis. They can't refute his mathematics. More recently, NASA employee Robert Frost said that the best thing that governments could do, if the mathematicians and scientists mentioned are correct, is to tell the public to get ready and to hunker down. Although such an announcement has not or would not be made any sooner than necessary, even if NASA privately has confirmed to some of the world leaders that we are indeed at risk. If it strikes, the initial impact of Apophis and the consequent devastation would last for about a week. Check this out. Remember what we read here in verse 12 of Revelation 8. It says that when it hits, the fourth angel sounds, and a third part of the sun is smitten, a third part of the moon, and a third part of the stars, so that a third part of them are darkened, and the day and the light will not shine for a third part of the day. So this is what they're saying in the scientific community. Sounds a lot like this. If this hits, it will literally block the light through ash and all kinds of stuff that'll enter into the atmosphere. With all of this in mind, consider how in June 2004, the Kitt Peak National Observatory detected a sizable asteroid heading in the direction of Earth. Subsequent efforts made later in 2004 by that team we talked about, Siding Spring Survey, they called the asteroid Apophis. They named it after the ancient Egyptian spirit of evil, darkness, and destruction, a malevolent force that cannot be stopped according to legend. Immediately, possibilities of the collision with the celestial body with our planet became a focus of calculation and preparation on behalf of preventative efforts by experts across the world. The enormous asteroid will pass close to Earth on April 13th, 2029, according to a statement released by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory at California Institute of Technology. In fact, NASA admits Apophis, proximity in 2029, will be so close to the Earth that it will put some of our orbiting satellites in peril and will be visible in the daytime sky. A reporter from CNN, the science reporter, Greg Baer of CNN, he not only agrees, but he elaborates on the consequences of Apophis colliding with our planet less than 6 years from now, admitting that if the Earth is hit, the impact would unleash a blast that is equivalent to over 1 billion tons of TNT, resulting in at least 1 billion people dying, if not years of climate disruption following. Perhaps, listen, this is the cause for the extreme dual polarity that we see between the media and scientists and news stories on one side, listen, attempting to quell public fear, while on the other hand, preparedness, intervention, and meetings are quietly taking place among the members of NASA, expert astronomers, scientists, and even the most influential global political leaders and the elite of this world. Kind of intense, right? How much time I got? 4 minutes. I'm going to hurry now and try and get to the rest of this. Okay, so all of this that we've been talking about, it got me thinking. NASA seems very eager lately. Have you been noticing to practice hitting asteroids? If you've been paying attention, they launched something in November of 2021, and they called it the DART project. Let me show you. This is from Australian News. It's called the DART project, NASA's Solar System Exploration. I thought about it. Listen to this. I went and looked it up, and it just blew me away, and I'm hurrying. DART means Double Asteroid Redirection Test. It's a NASA space mission aimed at testing planetary defense. And then check this out. On the 24th of November of last year, 2021, it launched this thing. And what it was intended to do was to hit the asteroid head on. They were practicing shooting asteroids out of the sky. You got to ask yourself, if there's nothing to worry about, what are they doing? What, they ain't got nothing else to do? Let's practice hitting asteroids? I'm submitting to you that they know this thing is coming. And they are not telling us, of course, because it would create mass panic. But check this out. As I dug deeper into this, they sent this thing, DART, this Double Asteroid Redirection Test satellite thing, and hit this rock named Didymus. Listen, on November the 24th, 2021, they launched it. And then listen, on the 26th of September, 2022, they intentionally crashed into Dimorphos, the minor planet moon of the asteroid Didymus. Okay, so I said, wait a minute, September the 26th. Again, I spend time doing this a lot, so it reminds me of a date. So I went and looked at the date in the Hebrew calendar. The day that NASA hit this rock is the same exact day. September 26th is the day that the Hebrews, by the way, this is the rock they hit, September 26th. It's the same date that the Hebrews celebrate the Day of Trumpets. Okay, look, you cannot make this stuff up. We're studying that this asteroid's coming, right? And it's a result of the blowing of trumpets. What are the odds that NASA hits practicing blowing an asteroid out of the sky in deep space on the exact day of September the 26th, which is called Yom Teruah, which is the day of the blowing of trumpets? Is something being said to the discerning that the trumpets are about to be blown in the next few years? Listen, they hit the thing on September the 26th, 2022, the exact day of Yom Teruah, which is the day of trumpets. What they do is they blow these trumpets in Israel. The word teruah in Hebrew refers to making a loud noise by using a shofar. And it represents three things: war, alarm, or joy. I think all three in our case is the case. I think God is telling his children, get ready. In the next several months and years, the trumpets are getting ready to be blown. And he's showing us things, if you have eyes to see. All three are just ahead. What's also interesting, if you dig into it even deeper, it's on that same day, September 26, 2022, when you go back into the Hebrew calendar, Adam and Eve sinned on that day. Noah released the dove the third time. And Abraham bound Isaac and offered him. Okay, so I dug into Didymus. What is Didymus? Didymus is a mythological Greek hero from Athens. While attempting to perform a sacrifice to the god Dionysus, he offers a sacrificial animal, and he goes on and creates a garden. Now, he later builds a temple in the honor of him. Dionysus is a minor god in Greek mythology who is the god of wine and celebration. But listen, he is the son of Zeus, the god of lightning. That's the origins of this rock they hit in space. All of it can be found there. I'm hurrying, but you go look at it yourself. Now, I got 1 minute. All right, now check this out. We're bringing it on home. All right, so listen. We got 1 minute. So that got me to thinking, right? We've been being told about these these large booms that have been taking place around the world.
Social media lit up with posts by people claiming to hear a loud, explosive sound just before midnight. From Edo to Meyerland to Montrose, people were even posting about this in Alvin and Tomball.
WMUR received reports of people feeling or hearing the boom from more than 40 cities and towns across southern and central New Hampshire, from Keene to Farmington. People also say they felt it in northern Massachusetts and eastern Maine. Even a woman on Cape Cod writing in to say she too heard the boom.
Mysterious and loud booming noises in Malden. Folks who live there tell us that they hear this several times a week and that the sounds are actually scaring their children, scaring their pets as well. But as WBZ's Mike Sullivan shows us, no one seems to know where the sounds are coming from.
Check this out. It's from Australia News. Mysterious loud booms are heard across the globe, right? So check this out. Let me just read a little bit. Mystery boom sounds have been being recorded in 64 different places around the globe, including Australia. But NASA can't seem to explain it. But experts can't even seem to figure out what's been causing these strange sounds and loud booms. You know, that got me to thinking. With everything we've been talking about, and these explosions that we've been hearing around the world that people are reporting, it's quite possible that what's happening under the cover of darkness and night around the world is they are digging tunnels and underground cities for the global elite because they know this thing is coming. And they have begun for the last several years to prepare underground bunkers and protections. Is it any wonder that Revelation chapter 6 verse 15 tells us that when the wrath of the Lamb ultimately comes, they will be hidden in underground bunkers and deep in the mountains, and they'll call on the mountains to fall on them. Go read it, Revelation 6:15, I believe it is. This I went and looked up this particular place. It's 3 stories underground. So go do this research, listen to this post again, and finally, as I close out today, I thought about another random event. It just occurred to me as we were talking about this, and it was something that happened in 2017. There was a mysterious raid by the FBI in New Mexico, and where they raided was an observatory. Now listen, the director of the New Mexico Sunspot Solar Observatory issued a statement denying the facility had made contact with aliens prior to a mysterious FBI raid that shut down the facility and forced the evacuation of all surrounding homes in the city. In New Mexico, the mystery surrounding the evacuation of a small mountainous area in southern New Mexico has led to a lot of conspiracy theories. The Solar and Astronomical Observatory in New Mexico is now blocked off. I'm reading from a 2017 article by official government FBI tape, and they say they're investigating a security incident. The local law enforcement said the FBI didn't even contact us. They said their reason for being there was classified and that they have no information that they could give to us. Residents who've been evacuated said that they haven't gotten any answers either. They were not allowed to go home. Now, they began to hear tons of conspiracy theories that began to flood the internet, saying that maybe some alien craft had been spotted and or was going to land there. However, when they interviewed a professor who works at the observatory from New Mexico State University, James McKeeter, he said that the telescope didn't see any aliens. We'll make all the data public to the public in its unalterated form. But there's nothing hidden or kept secret here. I thought, okay, what didn't he say? He didn't say the telescope didn't see anything. He said the telescope hadn't seen aliens, right? That's kind of like a deflection response. What is the FBI doing invading an observatory? And why did they take the hard drives out? Several months later, what they ended up doing was blaming it on a janitor who was uploading child porn onto some of the most classified databases in the astronomy observatory thing. Give me a break. You know what I think? It's just me. I think somebody in there confirmed that Apophis is headed our way and was going to take the data and release it publicly. Government got wind of it. They invaded the laboratory. They shut it down. And it's being kept under wraps. A lot of things happening. A lot of things going on. April 13th, 2029 is just ahead of us. And we need to be paying attention to what's coming to pass. When you get into the rest of this, Revelation chapter 9, the star hits the earth. The bottomless pit is open. Apollyon comes forth. And the final 42 months of human history is triggered as the son of Lucifer takes his place. Let's close with this. I know I've gone a little over time. I hope it's still broadcasting, but here we go. Let me close with this. Luke 21. What does it say? Jesus speaking again. He says, men's hearts will begin to fail them for fear of what they see, for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven are going to be shaken. But this is the encouraging ones for those of you who believe. But then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with great power and great glory. And when these things begin to come to pass, you who believe out there, look up. Lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing nigh. Great battles just ahead of us. A lot of things coming. Question is, are you paying attention? And which side of the battle, which army are you going to fight for? Jesus said when these things begin to come to pass, look up. I hope this has blessed you, at least challenge you, and cause you to want to go do some of your own study. We're living in incredibly extraordinary times. Draw close to your loved ones, take care of your own, and prepare. The days ahead are filled with turmoil. But the bridegroom, indeed, is coming for his bride. God bless you. We'll see you next time. And until we meet again, always remember, keep looking up.